The rest of the program, I'm going to go through and highlight some of the trees and shrubs that you can use in your landscape. And then at the end, if there's specific ones that you want to ask about, you might jot it down and then we can have a discussion about them. This is a red bud, which is a great small tree for an urban landscape. Almost all, I would just about say all native trees grow really fast when they're young. Sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 feet in a year. Red buds particularly easily can grow 5 feet in a year. So, you know, sometimes people don't like to put in little trees, but I think, one, they grow fast, and two, again, I put in a number of microforests, which are basically a lot of native trees planted close together for folks recently. And I have noticed how, it's really interesting to notice how connected people feel to small trees in a way that they don't feel to large trees. You know, there's something special about seeing an oak tree eye to eye rather than, you know, looking up like that, which is wonderful too. So I encourage you to plant some native trees and shrubs, and they're great for wildlife. And a lot of them bloom when they're really young. This is a 3-year-old tree in Betty Hall's garden, a red bud. And it's quite large now after the 7th year. This is a black gum. Great fall color. Tulip poplar bloom. These are very fragrant. The hummingbirds love them. And again, it's so nice to see them right at eye level instead of way up in the top of the tree canopy. Tiger swallowtail butterflies have to have tulip poplars to survive. Some of you guys probably know about monarchs, that they require milkweed. There are many butterflies and moths which require specific trees or shrubs to lay their eggs on. This is a bald cypress. This is a really good one for rain gardens. You can see that this is planted right in the middle. The bark's real nice, and you can see that it's planted right at the base of the rain garden. So the water goes through this kind of little dry garden and settles in there. And the bald cypress is very happy and growing really fast there. Dwarf chestnut. Many species of plants, many species of butterflies and moths use dwarf chestnut, and they have really delicious chestnuts on them too.
Is that one of the Japanese bred ones, or are these native?
No, this is a native, and it's not the big chestnut, like it's a smaller one, maybe 20 to 30 feet. They grow really fast.
What's the name of it?
Dwarf chestnut.
It's not the American chestnut that gets the blight.
It's not the American chestnut that gets the blight. These can get a blight, but they generally don't. This is a pawpaw bloom. Pawpaws are really great small trees. They're all really great. I say that on every one of them, but they have really interesting little flowers. The fruit can be messy, but they need to reproduce. So if you're not close to a woods or somebody else has one planted, you're probably not going to get fruit, so that's not a problem. What you will get is zebra swallowtail caterpillars. And the zebra swallowtail caterpillars turn into zebra swallowtail butterflies. This is their host plant. They can't lay their eggs on something else. So if you don't have pawpaws, we don't have pawpaws, we won't have zebra swallowtail butterflies. And what a terrible thing that would be. This is probably one of my favorites really to use. This is a great one for rain gardens because it's very drought tolerant but also tolerant of wet soils, of floodplain species. It's buttonbush. And buttonbush attracts a host of tiny pollinating insects. I know a lot of us worry about bugs, but one thing is that the insects do not destroy the plants. They co-evolved, so it's not a problem there. The pollinating insects usually are not the same insects that will sting you. And even if they are, they're not interested in stinging you. You know, I work in native plants all the time with plants all around me, insects all around me. I've never been stung in a garden. They're interested in getting food. The benefit to these lovely flowers, besides the fact that they're wonderfully fragrant, is they attract all manner of tiny little pollinating insects. And hummingbirds, a lot of folks don't know, eat insects. They require insects for their protein, and they eat lots of insects early in the springtime, as do most birds, because they have to feed them to their babies. Wrens will catch a pair of wrens will catch 300 insects a day to feed their babies, caterpillars. This is blueberry. Blueberry, pretty flowers which attract insects. Great fruit if you can keep it away from the birds. Usually people want blueberry, it's funny because I'll tell people, oh, well, let's plant these in the landscape, they're good, and then suddenly they want to eat them. And so like, well, if you want to eat them, you have to put a net over them. So if you want blueberries to eat, it's nice to put them in an area where you can net them, but also to include some in the landscape. And they have really nice fall colors, so they're a very good plant to grow. They would be good for the rain garden because, again, they're tolerant of wet soils, but they do not require wet soils. A lot of people think they do, but the native ones do not require wet soil. And they do well in park shade and in dry shade. This is spice bush. Spice bush, I think, should be the poster child for native shrubs. It blooms in the spring before anything else does, like February. It's very fragrant, has pretty showy yellow flowers, has red berries in the fall for birds, and it is the host plant for the spice bush swallowtail caterpillar, which you can see that one. If you can see the little guy that looks like a bird dropping there, and then when they get bigger, they close themselves up into that leaf to hide. So you see, spice bush has all kinds of things. Early in the spring, it has flowers, which are for lots of insects to pollinate. Then later on, it has berries, which are good for the birds. It provides habitat for the spice bush swallowtail caterpillar. Lots of things. No non-native plants provide the needs for native wildlife in that same way. If anything, they may have flowers, which the butterflies like, and that's great. But again, you just have to keep in mind that they're not ever going to be able to provide completely for the needs of the native wildlife that we want in our world because they're beautiful, but that we also increasingly are finding that we need in our world to help us survive. This is the spice bush swallowtail caterpillar. And if we don't have spice bush in our yards, or sassafras, they also eat sassafras, only those two plants, these guys cannot reproduce. So this butterfly will die without having reproduced. I planted 2 years ago when I first was working in Lexington, 2 or 3 years ago, I planted spice bush in 3 different yards, and 2 of those yards that year had butterflies lay eggs on them. Yippee! It works. Arrowwood viburnum, same as a spice bush, flowers, berries, provides food for butterflies and caterpillars. And I want to make the point, I talk a lot about butterflies and caterpillars and moths because it's something we all recognize, but they are just one strand in the web of life. They're just one example. They're kind of the bottom because we have the plants, the insects, and then the rest of the wildlife. Probably not going to have foxes in your yard, but they depend on those things in the same way. So although I use them as an example, this is, it's for all of the biodiversity that we need in our yards. Many different varieties of native viburnums. All of them are very pretty. All of them are good for wildlife. There are lots of non-native viburnums. They're pretty. They smell good. Nobody eats them. This is Hearts Bursting with Love, or strawberry bush. It's a euonymus. Same thing, we have invasive euonymus that grows here that's not native. Doesn't provide anything. And these guys not only are good for wildlife, they're gorgeous. These pretty little fruits stay on here well into the winter. Chokeberry. These are the chokeberries. You see there's snow on there. So chokeberries are nice because they last on the plant way into the wintertime and sometimes early spring. So you get to enjoy them in your yard. And then in the springtime when the robins are coming back, they're just starting to become palatable. They're too sour. That's why they call them chokeberry. They're really too bitter and sour for the birds to eat early on. So in the springtime when there's hardly anything to find to eat, the robins just gobble these up. I remember once planting a big one that had berries on it, and 2 robins, sounds like I make this up, 2 robins, as the plant's here and I'm digging the hole, 2 robins flew onto the shrub and were like kind of fighting with each other on the shrub right there. Yes, it works. This is Itea Virginia Sweetspire. Very fragrant, nice flowers. There are a number of different cultivars. This is one that's available just at regular nurseries. Springhouse Garden, I know, have them. And they've been bred to be smaller or taller or whatever. They're still good for wildlife. The butterflies certainly like them. So that's it for trees and shrubs, and we'll head on down through perennials. Celandine poppy, good for shade. And I will say that many of these shade perennials are not particularly attractive for nesting butterfly, for nectaring for butterflies. One reason is that the butterflies aren't generally here in the spring when they bloom. The other thing is that they grow in the shade, and the butterflies don't like to be in the shade, particularly in spring when it's cool. They like to be out in the sun basking, other insects. But certainly they're very beautiful and a really important component. This is dwarf iris. They only get about this tall. Very compact and nice. The foliage stays nice all summer long, unlike some of the spring ephemerals, which die or go dormant after they bloom in the spring. These guys stay up. Wild columbine. I know a lot of you know wild columbine. Maybe you knew it was native, maybe you didn't. Only the red and yellow one, this one is native to Kentucky. The other ones are not. I don't know if the hummingbirds use the other ones or not, but they sure like this. Wild blue indigo is the perennial plant of the year last year. They don't really talk always about it being native, but it is. It's just one of the reasons that it's tough. It's very drought tolerant, but it also can take wet soil, so it's a very good one for the interior part of the rain garden. Butterfly milkweed. Well, a lot of us know this. We know that it attracts lots of insects. Most people have seen this one, the orange one. Not a lot of people know that there are many different varieties of milkweeds in Kentucky. This is swamp milkweed. Kind of a misnomer. It doesn't have to have swampy soils. It grows just fine in regular garden soil, but it will grow in swampy soil. So very good rain garden plant in the wetter or drier areas. When you're planting a rain garden, it's good to choose plants that will tolerate wet soils, but most of the time your rain garden is not going to be wet. It's going to be dry. So you have to choose things that can tolerate both. And you just have to do a little research, and there are lots of books available that tell plants that will work for you. This is purple milkweed. This is a little bit, I see somebody writing it down, so I have to say this is a little bit more challenging to grow than some of the others. It likes a richer, more loamy soil. This one is world milkweed. It only gets about this tall as compared to the common milkweed, which is about 7 feet tall. Really fragrant flowers, and the tiny little insects that hummingbirds love adore this. It blooms kind of mid-season.